Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is one of the most highly accomplished people in the entertainment industry we've ever had on our show. He's a successful songwriter whose works include the lyrics to You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, which became a huge hit for Dusty Springfield and Elvis Presley. He was a great record producer. He was the manager for many top music artists, including the Yardbirds, Marc Bolan, Japan, Wham, George Michael, Sinead O'Connor, Boney M, and many more. He's written 6 books, starting with You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, about his experiences in the music business in the 60s. Then came Black Vinyl, White Powder, a fascinating, disturbing expose of the impact of the drug culture on the British music business. Next came I'm Coming to Take You to Lunch, the story of how he took Wham to communist China, making them the first Western rock group ever to play there. He then wrote a history of the popular music business entitled The Business. After that came 50 Years Legal, Welcome to Our Liberation, marking 50 years since the UK decriminalized homosexuality. Most recently, he's released an absolutely delicious memoir entitled Sour Mouth, Sweet Bottom, Lessons from a Dissolute Life, an unforgettably frank, funny, and fascinating collection of episodes from his remarkably unconventional life. If that weren't enough, he's also directed 4 highly acclaimed documentary films entitled To Be Frank, in honor of what would have been Frank Sinatra's 100th birthday. 50 Years Legal, the companion film to his book by the same name. 27, Gone Too Soon, about the infamous 27 Club that includes music stars like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Amy Winehouse, all of whom died at the age of 27. And his most recent film is entitled George Michael, Portrait of an Artist, the definitive feature documentary of George Michael's life. I'm delighted to welcome the incomparable Simon Napier-Bell to our show. Simon, thank you so much for being here.
It's a real pleasure. You know how to make someone shy, don't you? I can't believe you're talking about me. It sounds ridiculous.
Well, you did all that.
No, but there we are. I must have been asleep or drunk.
Simon, I must say that of all the music industry people I've interviewed, you are by far the most unusual. And I say that because of this passage from your most recent book. You said, and I quote, "When I look back at my life, I didn't really care about the music business. Managing artists involved endless arguments. Writing hit songs felt more like luck than a job. Producing records meant sitting all day in a darkened recording studio. What I liked best was to travel, to be outside in nice weather, to eat in good restaurants, and to find pleasant companions to spend the night with. I was addicted to travel, not the music business." So Simon, you give the impression that your success happened almost in spite of yourself, because pleasure always came before professional ambition. Were you surprised by your own success?
Oh, in some ways. And when I was young, I just thought, to get through life at all will be a triumph, regardless of if it's successful or not in other people's eyes. But I had, as I progressed through the business, I did have to come to accept I was quite good at what I did. But that doesn't mean you have to devote your life 100% to it. I could still see the music industry for what it was, which is, it's an amazing rampage. It's fun. It's a romp, isn't it?
Do you think you could have had the same success today, given the totally different way the music industry operates nowadays?
I think so. I don't think the industry's changed a great deal because management is always the same. Artists, stars, that is, are very competent artists who are prepared to compromise with the way the industry works. The idea that stars are uncompromising is ridiculous. You don't compromise, you won't be a star. The industry demands something of you. The manager's job is to be the bridge between the star or the artist and his artistic ideas and ambitions and the rapacious capitalist industry. That hasn't changed. The infrastructure for how records are produced and put out has changed, but nothing else has changed.
You wrote that of all your accomplishments, you believe your greatest contribution to the British music business was the creation of a rehearsal studio in London called Nomis Studios. where legendary music artists like the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, Pink Floyd, Tina Turner, and many more came to rehearse. And you feel that way even though it wasn't a money-making operation. Why was Nama Studios so special to you?
Well, it was an extraordinary place. I had this idea I was managing a group and we couldn't find anywhere good to rehearse. Okay, if you're a beginning group, you've got no money, you accept being under a railway arch, sort of unheated in the winter. But, if you're the Rolling Stones or something, those top groups were going to recording studios and paying ridiculous top recording studio money to rehearse. And I thought there should be a really beautiful studio, same quality as a five-star hotel, where top artists could go and rehearse, but also new artists could find rooms which were smaller and cheaper and could mix with them. I thought it would be good for the industry. And making money, of course, making money isn't the objective. Making money is a nice extra which allows you to invest in a new piece of business. I don't do business to make money. I make money in order to be able to do more business. And this was a project which I thought would be great. And it was enormously successful. I mean, it's an incredible studio. You couldn't name a famous musician in the world who'd ever been to England and not been in that studio. And next to them, in the next room, might be a group who just got signed yesterday or hadn't even got signed yet. And there was a wonderful story, for instance, Paul McCartney's rehearsing and the group next door making a terrible noise. He sent his roadie, stormed in, said, "Shut up, will you?" And it's Lemmy from Motorhead. I mean, this is what the studio was like.
A lot of people seem to think that the pop music world in the UK back in the 60s was controlled by the so-called gay mafia. But you've said that simply is not true. But Simon, there were a lot of very successful gay people in the music business back then, weren't there?
Well, there were. And that's really because what I just said about the manager being a bridge between the artist and the industry. Gay people are brilliant at being, I don't want to say two-faced, that's not quite the thing, but presenting two faces. I mean, we're all born into straight families, so we're brought up bicultural. All gay people laugh at homophobic jokes if they're funny, because we also have that straight psyche, because you're around straight people all the time. And so we're a very good bridge. And Jewish people often are too, certainly of my generation, because Jewish kids got a little sick at school in my days. So people who had this ability to present a slightly different face when it was needed were very, very useful at bridging the gap between artists and record company. But the idea of a gay mafia, gay people can be as difficult and as snooty and uncooperative with each other as anybody else. And I remember suggesting to one gay executive at the time that was a gay mafia, and he said, "Good God," he said, "the queens of the industry, the people I'd like to kill the most." And here was a guy who was gay, and they never got together and plotted anything as a gay mafia. But of course, if you're gay, you go to the same social places and you meet the other people in the industry. You do tend to look like you're plotting. Usually, you're getting inside knowledge so you can work against the other person, not plotting with them.
Take us back to the moment when you first realized that you had become a success in the music business.
I don't think it's a bit like, you never really know. The first time it's a bit of a shock. People. Okay, I knew I was a success because I had a #1 record when I wrote "You Don't Have to Say You Love Me," but you think it's been a bit of luck. You heard the song, you had an idea for lyrics. What you don't know when you do that so casually is that how all songs are written. You hear the song, you think of lyrics, something comes in your head, you put it down. No, that's not so good. It's not something you learn at university with a 3-year course, and this is how you do it. And so the chances are, your first few songs, you'll feel just that you've been lucky. But bit by bit, if they continue to come, you'll realize that you do have a technique and you've learned about it. So when that first song came, I knew I was a success in other people's eyes. And then a television station came to me and said, "Could we make a program about you?" I was also managing the Yardbirds, which had been sort of equally lucky to get hold of. That doesn't mean I didn't do it well. It was just getting them was lucky. And then they made a program about me. And I thought, well, everyone sees me as a success. Maybe I should think of myself that way. But it doesn't come easily. I mean, I know how much I enjoy a pleasant hedonistic type of life. So I didn't feel allowed to call myself a success. Maybe I could do now.
I hope you do now.
Well, you can do it for me.
Simon, take it from me, you're a success. Now, as I said in my introduction, you've managed a lot of hugely successful music artists. You wrote that managing them was challenging because artists are terminally unsettled and that your principal job was to keep the group together. Why was that so difficult?
or perhaps to keep them unsettled, because art, all art really is the symptom of some mental unrest. That's what creates art. And anybody who's really superbly adjusted and is not sort of unsettled in that way I mentioned will probably go off and get a more regular job. And so the important thing with the group was whatever it was which had caused them to come together and write and be what they are shouldn't be disturbed. For instance, the first group I managed, the Yardbirds, the bass player, Paul Samuel Smith, who was absolutely essential to the group, came to me one day and said, I hate playing live. I want to leave the group. And I said, oh, you poor chap, how awful having to do something you don't like. Of course you can leave. Go and find a nice life. I didn't understand that my job, more than anything, was to keep the group together. By keeping the group together, any background of argument and unsettlement, if you like, between them remains, and they continue to create.
You've been a producer and you've been a manager. Which was most enjoyable for you?
Well, there's a complex question. Are we talking about the job or the lifestyle? You said in the intro, the problem with being a producer is you go in the studio at 10 in the morning and you come out at 3 the next morning and you're back again at 10 the next morning. And you can go months without seeing daylight. And that's not a way I like to live. In terms of the creativity, I think being a producer, I like it much more. I mean, you're not being interfered with by the daily events of 4 people in a group who've all got different things they want to do and ask you to book hairdressers appointments or whatever. So in the sense of the actual creativity and the feeling of well-being from the work you're doing, producing is lovely. I like it. And management is a difficult, endlessly tedious job, balancing people's egos and opinions and record companies' need for money. But you travel, you can live how you want. Nowadays you can't, but you used to be able to get on a plane and no one could contact you. Don't forget, until 1998, you could go abroad and no one could phone you. I mean, they had to make a booking on an international phone call 3 days ahead. You could live the life you wanted. And as you see from my book, that's just what I did. So management suited me, even though the work wasn't quite so rewarding.
You managed 2 of the most brilliant and yet deeply troubled music artists, George Michael and Sinead O'Connor. We all know about their traumatic childhoods, and you made a film about Frank Sinatra, who also had a very troubled childhood. Simon, why do you think that unhappy childhoods are so often the fuel for great artistry?
Well, unhappy, in nearly every case we're talking about with artists, and it's the fuel for performing music artists without doubt, usually means not having had the love you should have had, or maybe the love you expected, because perhaps you did get it and didn't recognize it, from your parents. Or they loved you in a way which wasn't like your next door guy sitting next to you in class got, and you feel neglected. And usually these people recede into themselves. If they're lucky enough to have their own bedroom, they go and spend a lot of time in it, look in the mirror, decide how to become someone people will love. And nearly every single, when I say nearly, I don't think I've ever come across an exception, but I've always preferred to say there is one. Nearly every single major creative live performance artist had a childhood of that sort. And the audience they so much want is the love they didn't get. Nearly everyone. And I only say nearly because I haven't come across one which wasn't. I've come across occasionally something I thought, no, that's the exception to the rule. And then when I've got to know them, I found, oh no, suddenly they come out with this story. When I was 3 years old, my auntie died and she was the one I liked the best. There's always something like that.
You made a brilliant documentary called 27, Gone Too Soon, about the 6 famous rock stars who died at the age of 27. Your research taught you that the brain isn't fully developed until we reach the age of 27. So knowing that, how is any manager of a music superstar who's, let's say, in their early 20s, how is any manager supposed to keep their client from going off the rails?
Well, often the managers go off the rails too. I mean, you have people back in my day in the 60s, like Andrew Oldham, who gave up managing the Stones because he just got too out of control of himself. He found the Stones and dragged him into drugs, but he'd been utterly brilliant in creating who they were. The fact is, I didn't want to do that film because I thought it was a load of rubbish. 27, you could pick any old age and people would have died. I just thought it was a silly thing. When I studied it, I found that many tribes considered 27 the age of adulthood, that special forces in the army, both in America and England, don't allow people to join until they've reached 27. And of course, under 27, what the frontal lobe gives you is a sense of cause and effect. And if you want people to run up a beat with bayonets straight into machine gun fire, you want guys who don't have cause and effect, who are too young to have worked out what's going to happen to them. And so the army recruits its frontline military from kids, young people, before they've got the full frontal lobe, and its special forces from people afterwards. Music industry does exactly the same. It knows it does, and it's quite cynical about it.
I never looked at it quite that way, but you're right.
I mean, the music industry knows what a problem it is. If they have an artist that hasn't been signed yet, however good they are to reach the age of 26, 27, the reason they're not signing them is not because they think they're too old to appeal to the fans. It's because they're going to give them a problem when they come to signing the contract and they see the unfairness of the contract, and they're thinking, whatever they've done up to that age, they're going to have to give it up to become a music star, which is very chancy. At 21, you don't give a damn. You walk out of university, you throw away a medical career, you give up the chance of being a judge just to pick up a guitar and be in front of an audience.
Yeah. Now, one of your most fascinating books is Black Vinyl, White Powder, about the prevalence of drugs and specifically cocaine in the British music industry. From what I could tell from your books, you were a big drinker, but you did not take hard drugs. How in the world did you tolerate the instability, the immaturity, the outright delirium of the drugged up people that you had to deal with every day?
Well, they had to deal with the drunk, so why not? I didn't have any moral qualms about it. I never took drugs at all. I mean, I smoked a few joints, and that's absolutely it. I once took an amphetamine tablet, not voluntarily. Somebody put it in a cup of tea or something, and I didn't sleep for 3 days. I hated it. Look, I loved alcohol. I learned how to use alcohol as a friend. It could wake me up. It could put me to sleep. It could make me feel better if I was feeling ill. It could make me feel, it could calm me in the evening or brighten me up in the morning. I really enjoyed alcohol, but I was disciplined with it. I never drank till the end of the day. The work had to be finished. And I didn't see any reason why other people shouldn't take other drugs if they could use them as skillfully, if you like. And some people did. I mean, even heroin addicts who I've managed really got themselves under control. They knew that every day at a certain time they had to take it. For 10 or 15 minutes, they might be a bit woozy in their head, and then the rest of 24 hours would be normal. In fact, heroin is one of the easiest drugs to deal with. It's not the drug which causes the problems, it's the company that people keep in order to get hold of it. Cocaine, quite different. People who take cocaine are just go zuzu. I mean, they get too full of themselves and they lose control of any balance. And marijuana was just boring. People drift off to a dream and you can't get your sense out of them. But fine, if they keep that to the end of the work every day, that's no problem.
You must have been very even-tempered when you were dealing with these people, because let's face it, people that are dependent on cocaine, they can be very unreliable and they can be very unstable.
Well, I never thought of being patient with them because they were on drugs. They were artists, and I've never met an artist who wasn't like that with or without the drugs. I mean, artists are bipolar. That's what they are. And some of them take drugs to calm their bipolarism. And some of them take them to, they're bipolar in two different ways. They're already coked up, if you like, and they have to calm it, or they're far too calm and they have to increase their activity level. And most of them get very skillful at it. That they'll put themselves on a high by either taking or not taking the drugs accordingly, and create in that situation, and then put themselves in a more balanced situation to edit what they've created and turn it into something commercial. They get pretty skillful at dealing with their highs and lows.
I want to ask you a bit more about George Michael. First of all, congratulations on your new film entitled George Michael, Portrait of an Artist, which is now streaming on all the big streaming platforms. Why did you decide to make that film?
Well, I make films and I wanted another film to make. So that's the first simple answer. What can I persuade someone to finance? And let's think of another film I'd make, which I'd enjoy making. I managed George. I mean, when you're a manager and you get to 45 or 50 years in the business, I'm talking not my age, 45 years in the business, you look back and think, my goodness, have I wasted my life sort of dealing with these stupid teenagers who come along, they're so arrogant, they want this and they want that, and they take too many drugs. I could have been a judge, I could have been a lawyer, I could have been a politician. And then sometimes in your life, an artist comes along and makes you realize, no, this is a really worthwhile job, that that pop music isn't just a silly, trivial thing. It is a reflection, just as good as any other art. It's a reflection of society, and it gives back to society a lot of knowledge about itself, which is very essential. And this is what artists do, really. They look at life, they reinterpret it and give it back to us, and we learn from it. And when a great artist like that comes along, you say, no, it's been a worthwhile job, and is a worthwhile job. Sinead O'Connor was the same. I suppose looking back, even the Yardbirds were, but I didn't appreciate it at the time.
As you know, there's another documentary film about George Michael that he was involved in called Freedom, and the uncut version was released a while ago. What did you think of that movie?
Well, it looks to me like a sort of 90-minute music video. I mean, it really is more than anything a celebration of him on stage singing. I mean, of course, there is some other stuff in this, some private video in it. But, you know, there's a lot of music in it and not a lot about George or inside his life or revealing anything which we didn't already know. It looks more like a very good, well-made publicity movie. And it is, it's excellent. And certainly you read the comments from the fans who went to the cinema and they stood up and sang with the songs and cried. It had a place in the market. But mine was really about finding out something new about George, learning, and I learned too from making the film, things I didn't know. For instance, about his songwriting, I had no idea that he never wrote his lyrics down. Although I'd managed him and been in the studio when he recorded, it had never occurred to me he hadn't actually written them down. I presume just by now he'd learned them, so he didn't. That's why he wasn't reading them. But to find out that when he made the album Listen Without Prejudice, that song by song, having made a backing track, he went in the studio and threw the words out, sometimes just making them up as he went along and then correcting them, just as you would on paper, but he was doing it actually on tape. I was amazed. I'd learned something so deeply important about his songwriting, and I'd managed him and hadn't known it.
Simon, I find it supremely ironic that George, who was petrified to come out publicly, was being managed by you, a man who'd been openly gay since the 60s. Did you ever give George any advice about whether or not to come out?
A little bit. I mean, George never told me he was gay. I knew he was gay. The first day I managed him, I knew he was gay. I mean, I suppose when I started managing Wham, I was more well-known than they were, or equally well-known. So when it was in the newspaper, Simon Napier-Bell takes over Wham management, I think the very same day, somebody called me up, oh dear, that pop star of yours, she's gay, I had him in a cottage last night. And oh, that's a bit of a shock because I didn't know at all. But I knew right there and then, first day. And, George was, the thing about not coming out for a long time, George knew who he was. He knew he was gay before I managed him. He'd been going to gay clubs. In the movie, you'll see Peter Tatchell, who's a big UK gay campaigner, met George when George was 15 in a gay bar. I mean, George knew what he was. And, coming out is many stages. You have to come out to yourself. You must come out to your very close friends. He was said to have come out to Andrew and Shirley, one of the backing singers, when they were making Club Tropicana. You come out to a broader and broader range of people. When I was managing him, he obviously he sort of wanted to come out because he went to gay bars, gay weekends and things like that. I don't think he wanted to ever have to go to a journalist and say, I'm giving you a scoop. I think he sort of wanted to be found out. And then when he wasn't, he saw his career getting bigger and better and thought, well, this is not the time. But we had sort of those very British conversations, where I'd be with him and say, George, if one day you perhaps thought or Andrew, maybe perhaps you were gay, I would say to you, you should do whatever you want. You could come out or you could not come out. Wham is a very heterosexual image. Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, that sort of thing. You're only planning to do it for another year. Perhaps it'd be better not to come out and keep the image secure and then do it when you finish. But, I guess you're not going anywhere, so it doesn't matter. And it's one of those sort of conversations because he never wanted to talk about it full on.
Did you read James Gavin's book, George Michael, A Life?
I did, yeah.
What did you think of it?
Well, the point is, in researching this film and then in making it, I don't think there's anything in John Gavin's book which I hadn't known. I mean, I was hoping there was because I love finding new things. But I read it from start to finish, and it looked pretty much like my research document, 300 pages of everything I found out. It was fair and well written. He missed things out, some things which I knew he'd missed out. One or two things he put in which I knew, which I thought didn't need putting in. I tried to keep my film as being things which are relevant to creativity. Obviously, a private life is relative to creativity, and even George being arrested in Los Angeles became very relative to creativity because he made that incredible video. But I tried very hard. I was thinking, suppose you're making a film about Van Gogh or Rachmaninoff or somebody. You don't go into too many personal details except where they're relevant to a piece of art. And that's what I tried to do with George.
You managed Sinead O'Connor for a period of time. You described her as a brilliant artist, but totally unstable. We all know that when she tore up the photo of the Pope on Saturday Night Live, her career took a major nosedive. But despite the impact of that behavior on her record sales, you personally approved of what she did, didn't you?
I think it's what I would have done. You know, there are. I mean, you don't always do things because you sit down and think this would be wonderful publicity, or even because I really believe it. You do impulsive things. I'm somebody. I hate heights, not because I'm afraid per se of heights. It's because I'm afraid I might jump off. And you know, I could even walk through I was in a shopping mall in Kuala Lumpur a few months ago, and there was this woman sitting on the edge of a fountain with her baby, and I suddenly had an impulse to run and grab the baby and throw it in the water. I thought I'd just walked as far as I could the other way. You know, I get mad impulses, so I understand other people's mad impulses. So, you know, Sinead was full of mad impulses, and I totally understood them. And she's wonderful. I mean, she really was the ultimate definition of an artist. More than George even. He wrote down everything what makes an artist and why they're so superb. And Saturday Night Live, yeah, I mean, if I'd been her manager at the time, I'd have probably suggested it to her. You know, I come from the old school of management. You know, Kit Lambert, who managed The Who, you know, who taught them how to destroy hotel rooms. It wasn't Keith Moon who destroyed hotel rooms. It's Kit. Kit said, oh, we need some publicity. Destroy your hotel room. And then Keith said, oh, I don't really want to. I quite like my room. And Keith said, oh, it's destroyed. And so he came down and said, I've done it. And Kit went up and he turned the bed over. And Kit said, no, that's not destroying it. You know, pull the curtains down, get an axe, you know. And then there was another manager who was managing a group called Goldie and the Gingerbreads, who are actually an American girl group in England. And so he arranged to have people break into the London Zoo, and they stole Goldie the Golden Eagle in the middle of the night. It was those days of management. And I'm sure if I'd been managing Sinead, I would have suggested it.
Without concern for the impact on the record sales and on her career?
You know, my job is not necessarily to get record sales or even to make an artist wealthy. It's to do what they want. And they come to me and they discuss what they would like to do, what they would like to achieve. Most of them say, I want to be a big star and have money and get laid and buy a house for my mum and dad. Some of them don't. Some of them come and I just want a facility where I can express myself and be a great artist. And sometimes I feel I can go along with that. Sometimes, I mean, I managed Japan, and David Sylvian, the lead singer, after Japan had huge success and become one of the most influential rock groups in Europe there had ever been. He came to me and said, I don't like being famous. I want to be like a left bank poet. And I had to look at that and think it's going to be a lot of work and absolutely no money at all. It's a difficult thing to achieve with me being happy as well as him being happy. You know, we probably all need to have the money to go traveling and have good meals. That would be enough if there was enough money. But without even that, I wasn't going to do it. So you're not necessarily looking for money. And a downturn in her record sales was an upturn in her personal satisfaction and having achieved something and stated something. And by the time I was managing her, she was able to do all the sort of left-wing music festivals in the world. We pay big money. I mean, she got get $100,000, $150,000 for half an hour singing. From those festivals, have an element of sort of left-wing, you know, anti-Christian, anti-political solidarity. So she did achieve something. It just took a long time for it to flow from what she did. And for one thing, she achieved my respect the night she did it. I'm not unique. There must have been a lot of other people who felt the same.
Yes, no, I agree with that.
Now, it's only a picture. What did she do? She tore up somebody's picture. What's so awful about that? If she tore up the president's picture, nobody's complained. You telling the Pope's more important than the president? I mean, come on.
Now, Simon, with all of the renewed attention surrounding Elvis Presley because of the new Elvis movie, I can't resist asking you about Elvis's recording of You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, which many people hated, but you actually really liked his version of the song, didn't you?
I loved it. You know, it's a very interesting song. We wrote this song in the 60s, and Vicky Wickerman, who I wrote the lyric with, and I were not romantic people. The 60s was not about romance. It was about shagging. The 50s was about romance. The 60s was about the pill had been invented. You could now go out, pick someone up, have a shag, and there was no danger. No one was going to get pregnant. And Dusty Springfield, who's a very good friend of Vicky, came back from Italy with this acetate of the song, which had won the San Remo Festival that year. And it was this fabulous romantic song. And Vicky and I said, all right, we'll write lyrics. And we went off to her room and put it on her record player. And this big intro came out. And I said, you know, this is a love song. We're going to have to say, I love you. And Vicky said, oh, no, I love you. It's horrible, gucky stuff. I said, well, I don't love you. And she said, oh, that's going a bit too far. I said, well, what about you don't have to love me? She said, oh, that's good, but it didn't fit. We added some more words, and you don't have to say you love me. And that really felt like a good line. You know, it's not just a matter of did it mean anything, it just felt like a good flowing line. It fitted with the song, and we were very happy with it. But actually, that was a pulling line, because in 60s London, if you went to a nightclub at night, 2 or 3 in the morning, you were sitting next to somebody at a table and you were both pissed, and you really fancied them, you wanted to take them home and have sex, you know, and you say, come on, let's go home and have a shag. And they say, oh, I don't really know, you know, I don't really know you well enough. And you say, oh, no, you don't have to say you love me, just come and have a shag. So it wasn't a romantic line at all. And Dusty turned it into this incredible, heartbroken romance. Then Elvis came along and he did something incredible. He made it really masculine. You know, he was the very butch guy, and he said, look, you don't have to love me. Just we don't have to discuss all that romantic stuff. Just can we get it out the way a bit? You know, he just tossed off the lyrics really quickly and in a very butch way, speeded the song up. Oh, I want to get rid of this. I want to get this love stuff out the way as quick as I can. And that's what I felt. I thought it was brilliant.
There's a wonderful story in your latest book about the time you met Elvis and Colonel Parker backstage in Las Vegas, and you asked them for a gold record. Would you mind telling us that story? I just love it.
Well, I would. After he did, you don't have to say I love me. I thought I knew he did it in his live show always, and so the year after he'd done it, I thought I must go and see the live show. And I found myself in Vegas with a friend, with Kit Lambert, the Who's manager, who I just mentioned. And after the show, Kit said, "You've got to go meet him." And I said, "You come too." And Kit wanted to go off and score some drugs, so he persuaded me to go backstage, which is not something I ever do. I'm not a starstruck person, and I don't want to disturb artists. They're just normal people. They've done their job. They don't want people coming and bothering them. But I went, and you know, strongly, I just walked backstage completely unchecked. If you're British and if you're a manager yourself, you know how to behave when you walk backstage. You know, people sort of stand back for you, and a British accent helped. And I got backstage, and there was a queue of you know, middle-aged American women, you know, with blue rinse, you know, sort of, not New York or Los Angeles people, you know. And I politely got in the queue and waited, and finally I got to the front of the queue, and I don't know what I'd come for really. I just was going to shake hands. Yeah, what's your name, Simon? Yeah, hi Simon, how are you doing? And then my mouth, who I don't always agree with, suddenly I heard it say, "Could I have a gold record?" Because I hadn't thought to say that. And he turned to Colonel Parker, who was sitting in this chair next to him, and he said, "Colonel, give the kid a goldie." Kid, I mean, I was almost the same age as Elvis, you know, but I was English and very polite. That makes you look much younger than the other person. So Colonel Parker asked my name card, and I gave it to him. And 4 weeks later in London, actually it was in Paris, I was living in Paris at the time, this gold record turned up. You know, "Thank you for a great song, Elvis." And I thought that was really one of the wonderful of it. But the week later, an invoice turned up for $100, which in today's money is $1,000, and it didn't cost $10 to make a gold record. And I found out that Colonel Parker did this all the time. Almost anybody could have a gold record if you paid him $100. I mean, there was 500,000 records being sold, gold records being given away a year. So he was doing well out of it. But I was still pleased to have it.
What a story. Is it true that at one point you gave up the opportunity to be David Bowie's manager?
Oh, well, he wasn't quite David Bowie yet. This was a long time ago. He was still called David Jones and hadn't become what he became. But I got a phone call one day from a guy who said he was a tour manager. Or a manager, he said he was a manager. I was managing the Yardbirds. I was quite an established, well-known manager already. And he had a stunning artist. Could I come around and see him? And he was polite enough. So the place he wanted me to go was only around the corner from where I lived. So I went round there. And when I got there, it was in a basement flat. I went downstairs and it's a rather dingy room. And the guy who'd phoned me introduced himself, said, "Hi, I'm Ralph. This is David, and he's going to be the biggest star there ever was. And I'd like you to manage him jointly with you." And I said, "Well, I need to know more than that in order to manage him." And Ralph said, "Well, take a look." He said, if you agree to manage him, I'll give you half the money. You can have sex with him." And in typically good British upper middle class style, I was outraged. I said, "Well, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. I've never heard such a ridiculous, horrible thing to say," and stormed out. So looking back, I lost 2 opportunities with one, didn't I? Either would have been quite interesting, having sex with him or managing him, but he wasn't really my type. Isn't it interesting? You look back, and I can tell the story. But suppose I'd looked at that guy and he was everything I fancied. I wonder if the story would have ended up differently.
Well, having read many of your books, I think the story would have been different.
Well, it's easy to be moral when you're not really very interested in it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, Simon, you've already mentioned that you're not the type of person to be starstruck. Even though you worked with, you got to know a lot of big stars, you were never interested in hanging out with the stars. And you wrote that stars were for managing, not socializing with, unless they were your clients. Were there ever any big stars that did make you starstruck when you met them?
No, never. There were some stars I enjoyed their company and hung out with them. Usually ones I wasn't managing, because management isn't a friendly. It's not. You're not friends. You're perfectly friendly. You are friends, but in the way you are with your doctor. You can talk about your doctor. You like your doctor. You almost enjoy getting ill. He's so nice to go and talk to and see. But if he moves away, you don't continue to see him and phone up and say, "Let's have dinner." It's a very nice professional relationship. And managing people involves a lot of understanding and putting up with each other. Not just me with them, but them with me, which is fine when you're with them. But, if you stop managing an artist and then you say, "Oh, let's go and have a dinner," forget about management now. You'd be amazed to find there's nothing to talk about, because you've had dinner with them maybe 200 times in a year. But all you've ever talked about is them. Artists are self-obsessed. They've talked about themselves, and you've talked about how to further their career. Suddenly, there's not much to talk about except their opinions, which you've never really heard or bothered with before. So you don't really stay friends usually with artists you stop managing. 1 or 2 I have. There's a group called Blue Mercedes I managed in the 80s, or after Wham. They were very successful, and I stayed friends with them for years, and still am. With one has died, and the other one's still a good friend. Usually not. I always stayed very friendly with Jeff Beck, who I liked a lot. The rest of the Yardbirds, they're all friendly. They're all people I know well and talk to and email back and forth, but they're not friends. I don't go to their birthdays and get invited to Christmas and things like that.
I guess I'm very lucky, because my managers, Rick and Robin Marcelli, I really do consider them very good friends. We talk all the time.
Well, they are your managers. I'm talking about what happens when they're not your managers. I've never managed anybody I wasn't friendly with. I think when I managed Japan, I had dinner with them virtually every single night. And when they were on tour, I toured with them, which I didn't with most groups I managed. When I managed Marc Bolan, I saw a tremendous amount of him. Yardbirds, much less, because they were already quite a tight-knit group who knew each other before I came along, so it's more difficult to become part of it. Usually when you're managing someone, you do get on very, very well with them. It's just that when the management stops, you find there was less in common than you thought there was.
There's a very charming chapter in your latest book in which Rupert Everett asked you to turn him into a pop star. You said that actors don't generally make it as pop stars. Why not?
Well, the problem with actors is if they're actors first and then want to become pop stars, they don't understand the reality of being a pop star. A pop star is sold on being a real, genuine person. You walk out of your house in the morning, there might be paparazzi there, and you can't act being a pop star. You've got to be who you are. If you're not who you are, the history of pop is littered with young people who wanted to be pop stars, and their manager or record company designed an image and a presence for them, and they couldn't live up to it. It's really, really bad for their mental health. So pop stars are the real person, give or take a few tweaks which you have to make to give yourself a stage image. Actors are definitely not the real person. The purpose of being an actor is each role you take is showing how brilliant you are at not being yourself. So when an actor wants to become a pop star, and Rupert was the same, he thought he could walk off the street being Rupert, anonymous when he's not playing a part, and then play the part of a pop star. Well, he didn't think that. He's much cleverer than that. He's probably the cleverest of all our actors. But that's what I warned him that you couldn't do. And there's been almost, I can't think of a single case where an actor became a pop star. Other way around is possible, because as a pop star, you can learn the craft of acting, and it's not going to change who you are and who the public already know you are.
Simon, you knew Simon Cowell, and for a while you managed the career of his ex-girlfriend, Sinead. We all know the immense success Simon has had as a TV talent show judge. Would you have ever wanted to do the same thing, to be a judge on The X Factor or Britain's Got Talent or American Idol?
Look, it's difficult not to look at it and think, yeah, that would be good, especially when you hear they get, $100,000 an episode and all they're doing is sitting there and sort of being themselves. But I did get offered it a couple of times. And I mean, I didn't get offered the final part. I was auditioned for one time. It was, in fact, The X Factor. I didn't know at the time it was going to be The X Factor. And they got me in there. I think they were auditioning all the top managers. And they explained that it was going to be, before that, all we'd seen was pop idols. So this is a new concept, The X Factor. You actually worked with an artist and developed them. And so they explained that you'd meet a pop artist in the first episode, and then you'd go and work with them and develop them. And what would you do? And I was a bit flippant. I'd say, well, if they're any good, they won't need working with them. If they're no good, it's no point working with them. So I didn't fit in with what the program wanted at all. And I'm afraid that probably would have happened if I'd done one of those shows anyway. I mean, I certainly would always say, I did actually, we're wrong about this, because I did actually do a show for 2 or 3 years in England back in the 80s. It was exactly what a pop idol show is. There were 4 entertainers came on the stage. There were new people. There were 4 stars sitting in the box in the theatre. There was me, there was Mickey Most, there was a journalist who was well known at the time, and usually a guest singer or something like that. And then you had to judge them and say what you thought of them. And I did it for a while, but I think even though they liked the publicity of it, I think I was too blunt usually. I didn't have much compassion for a comedian who couldn't make you laugh or a singer who couldn't hold a tune.
I think the public appreciates that. Now, speaking of talent contests, you wrote about managing a Russian singer by the name of Alsu, who came in second at Eurovision in 2000. There's always been a lot of speculation about whether the Eurovision contest is legitimate, or is there corruption involved in the voting? What's your opinion?
Corruption is a very specific word in the English language. In the whole music industry, the whole way that records are plugged and turned into hits, it's corrupt if you simply say, here's $100, will you play my record? Or actually, that's not corrupt, it's just business. It's only corrupt if it's a public radio station, because you're not allowed to advertise, and that's effectively paying for advertising. On private radio stations or the internet, which we have now, that's a perfectly legitimate business deal. $100, I play your record. I don't think there's anything quite that direct in Eurovision. But Alsu was already a top singer in Russia. I felt there was a chance of making her get the first top 3. She didn't really have that ultimate panache, which a #1 star has, but it was fun to try. And her father was very wealthy. And so I arranged that the record she was going to sing got released all over Europe in different countries well in advance, so that if that country happened to vote for the songs, people wouldn't say, oh, it's a fix, the record never came out, they never heard it before, how did they vote for it? So that was laying the groundwork for then trying to engineer that it did get voted for. And, we manipulated a little bit. I went off to Malta, where the head of the Eurovision committee owned a pig farm and dealt mainly in making bacon and selling it. And lo and behold, an order came through from Russia, Alsu's home country, for a couple of 100,000 kilos or something of best bacon. Then in Romania, I had dinner with the Minister for Energy, who Romania are a bit short of oil, and very nicely, Lukoil, the company Alsu's father owned, agreed to sell them some oil. And then we got a lot of votes from those countries. I have to presume that happens all the time. We came second, and I think, give or take a bit more corruption, I could have got her first. And if I'd done nothing, we'd have probably ended up 10th or 12th. Russia had always come last previously. England and Russia competed every year for who would be last. So I did quite well with it.
You sure did. In the 1980s, you were managing Wham. And in 1985, you and Jazz Summers managed to get Wham to perform in China, which no Western pop music group had ever done before. You said you did it not to open up new markets for the music industry, but to jumpstart Wham's promotion in America. And it worked big time. You spent over 2 years negotiating with the Chinese government, and that adventure is the subject of your wonderful book, I'm Coming to Take You to Lunch. You've said that that was your favorite book. Why?
It was interesting. I'd written the 2 books previously about the music industry. The first book I wrote should have been my favorite book because it was really incredibly out. I mean, 1982 or 3, I was writing, exposing things in the industry. I didn't think it was exposing. I was just naive enough to think you just write down what you've seen and done, and that's what you should do. And later on, everyone said, oh, how brave of you to make that expose. I didn't think that way. But it was the first book I'd written. I also wrote about my personal life a great deal in the 60s because I felt the two were very interrelated, both that the music industry allowed you to, as a gay person, to live in a way which most gay people couldn't live in the 60s, and the ease with which the industry accepts people, idiosyncratic people who aren't part of the norm. But I didn't write very well. It's my first book, and I look back and it wasn't very well written. Black Powder, White Powder, without any question, was written really well. It's the best book I've written. If you're talking about writing, I polished it and worked on it. I think there's not a word in that book which I'd like to change. I was very happy with everything I said, but it was considered. And I thought about what I was saying, and I didn't offend people without intention. I might have offended people, but everything was intentional. Then when it came to writing about Wham Go to China, I was been asked so many times to write a book about Wham, and I didn't want to. Wham were a fabulous group, but they were 2 happy-go-lucky teenagers who had some luck and some fun, and George was a brilliant songwriter. But most of managing them was dealing with 2 very much younger than me people. And I wasn't part of their, I never became to George or Andrew the way they were to each other. I mean, they were an incredibly close duo. And so I said, well, I'll write a book about my life at the time I was managing Wham. So it is about Wham, but it's all the other things which went on in my life at the same time. And that made it fun. And I decided I wanted to write a book which read like a novel. I didn't want to write a factual book. I'd read a book by I've completely forgotten his name, a man who had written a book about the Dutch merchant ships going to Indonesia in the 1600s. And it was brilliantly written. It felt just like a novel. All the balance and the ups and the downs of the book. And I thought, I'm going to write a book like that. And to do that, it meant that I had to cut the amount of Wham down to about 20% of my real involvement and build up the other people in the book so that they all balanced out. And so I was quite proud of having achieved that, which reads pretty much like a novel. And it also has lots of insights and inside things people didn't know about. So I like that. It was good.
Yes, it's a delightful book. And even though you know how it's going to end, you really want to keep turning the pages because the story, the adventure, the journey is just so fascinating. It's really a great book. Now, a number of years ago, you created a hugely successful rock concert show called Raiding the Rock Vault with a residency in Las Vegas featuring a band of rotating members from top rock groups. This has been one of the top shows in Las Vegas for many years. What gave you the idea to create that show?
9 years. It's been voted best of Vegas, 9 years running. I was sitting in a rock nightclub in Bangalore in India, drinking champagne, as one often does. And about 2 in the morning, and I was alone, so it obviously wasn't a successful evening up to that point. I finished the bottle of champagne and got up to go to the toilet. And for an hour, I'd been listening to this incredible succession of fantastic, all the greatest rock records ever. And they were played in exactly the order I would choose them myself. As one finished, I just think, oh, it'd be great. Oh, you played it. And I thought, I've got to go and thank the DJ. It's so amazing that he's almost read my mind for an hour. And I got up, looked around for the DJ, and it was a covers band. how embarrassing. I mean, even when you're drunk, you're meant to know the difference between a cover version and an original. And I was amazed. But it's one of those very clever Filipino bands who could play feedback very quietly. The singer imitated the sound of the voice of each singer. He didn't just use his own voice. Every singer was imitated. It's brilliantly clever. And when I sat down again, I thought, that's what the world needs. It needs top rock musicians. It needs the top rock musicians in the world who are not working at that moment to come together, form a band, and play 2 hours of all the songs, our favorite rock songs. So it took a while, it took 2 years, with my partner, Harry Cowell. And we put this idea together, and we finally got a band. I mean, the band it's been there now for 10 years. We've got 40 musicians, and whoever's not on tour is in the band. For instance, for a long time, we used Doug Aldrich from Whitesnake on guitar. And then if Whitesnake went on tour, usually Tracy Guns from Guns N' Roses and LA Guns would come in. Howard Meads from Harp was the MD. And then if he was away, another currently elevated guitarist would come in. So it's a superstar band. And they play the most famous rock songs. And they've never had the chance. They thank me. They say, oh, I thought they might not like it. You know, if you're from Whitesnake, do you want to play the Rolling Stones or the Who? Yes. They said, these are our favorite songs. We've never had a chance to play these songs. If you're a Whitesnake, you can't play a Rolling Stones song. Now we're playing our favorite songs. But they took it very seriously. Tracy, for instance, when he was the guitarist, he had to play Stairway to Heaven every night. He had to play Jimmy Page's solo. He didn't want to do his own solo because that would be not respectful to Jimmy Page. But he didn't want to copy a Jimmy Page solo because that wasn't respectful to himself. So he found every bootleg tape that ever been of the Led Zeppelin playing Stairway to Heaven. And he found over 120 different solos Jimmy had played, and he took them all out, he notated them, and he turns it into 30 consecutive phrases. And every night he chose different phrases to put them together. So it was all Jimmy Page's phrases, but he was creating the solo every night. That's fantastic.
It really is fantastic. Simon, I want to ask you a bit about your personal life. You are now in your 80s and you've been openly gay since 1961, which was almost unheard of and incredibly risky back then because homosexuality was still very much illegal at the time. What was it about you that made you so fearless? Because even though you don't feel you deserve any praise for being your true, authentic self as a young man, it was an act of great courage to live as an openly gay man back then. Where did that bravery come from?
You know, first of all, no bravery, just incompetent at covering things up. But, you know, I wasn't out. You know, I said earlier, out means a lot of things. Out accepting myself as gay, probably about 1961, because, you know, until then I wasn't completely sure. And you try this and you try that. And then I suppose from the first time I had a boyfriend who I lived with, you can't live with a guy, you know, in a small flat, and you're going to go and rent it from somebody. So the landlord knows you're gay, you're going to go out together. But you couldn't talk to straight friends about being gay in those days. I don't think any, or even maybe any of my straight friends, they probably all knew I was gay, but I didn't talk about it. It was dangerous. I mean, you could actually, just by being gay, end up with the police outside in a car sitting to watch what you're up to and arrest you. So I came increasingly out and less concerned. And certainly by 1965, 66, I mean, when I was managing the Yardbirds, nobody in the group didn't know I was gay. Nobody in the industry didn't know I was gay. Everybody knew I was gay, but not because I said it. It's because I was incautious about how I lived, and they could see how I lived. And I never denied it if they asked me. And occasionally one would really delight in saying it. You know, I mean, there was one time in 1965, I remember 2 agents arrived from America who wanted to book the Yardbirds for a tour in America. And there was classically old-fashioned music industry agents. They had those big black shoes like policemen wear, you know, all very polished, and ties and suits. Nobody does that now. And we went off to dinner, and they were horribly straight. I mean, just, you know, you couldn't really let your hair down and talk about anything. And then after dinner, they said, you know, well, we thought we'd go to a strip club. Do you know any strip clubs? And I said, only ones with boys, because I'm gay. And it shocked them. I don't think it shocked them that I was gay. It shocked them that anyone would say that. because no one said things like that. You think about it, they must have gay friends. They might. Who doesn't have gay friends? You can. No one's. When AIDS came along, the one great thing about AIDS is nearly every family found they had a gay relation, and everybody found they had gay friends. And in those days, if you throw that in somebody's face, you'd be surprised. They don't come back with prejudice. In fact, they rather feel put in their place, although you haven't tried to put them in their place. And it was enjoyable to do things like that. By the time I'd done that a few times, I guess I was pretty out. And I didn't go around saying I'm gay.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I just lived my life. Now, in 1977, you had an idea to find an openly gay singer who would sing songs to his own gender. But the record company you pitched it to said no way, that it would be a failure. Looking back, do you think they were right?
Probably, yes. It wasn't quite like that, though, because it was Atlantic Records, and Atlantic Records was two brothers, Nesri and Ahmet Ertegun, and to a large degree, Jerry Wexler, who was their producer. And I met Nesri by chance in Atlanta airport when I was flying from New York to LA, and he was flying from LA to New York. We ended up in the lounge and got talking. Hello, how are you? What are you doing? Where are you going? Or something. And I thought, well, this is quite a chance. I'm sitting with Nesri Ertegun. Who knows, I might come up with an idea. I just pulled this idea out of my head. I mean, I'm literally just sitting there with him, thinking I'd probably get 20 minutes. Who knows, I might sell an idea, make a bit of money, have some fun. And this idea just jumped into my head. I said to Nesri, you know, I've got this brilliant idea. It's time that somebody signed a gay singer, marketed him as such, and he sang songs to men. You know, you think Frank Sinatra, all the same sort of songs, all the sorts of music, or, you know, Luther Vandross, if he actually was singing songs to men instead of being closeted. And Nesri thought it's a brilliant idea. He went absolutely head over heels for it. I said, we'll do it. So I got on my plane to LA feeling very happy. We just pulled off a good big deal. We got a huge budget, you know, a new project. And then Ahmet, his brother, came on the phone and said, we're not doing it. There's no way. You know, nobody wants to hear those songs. And I argued with him. And he said, no, I'm right. He said, just sing any famous song right now and change the gender. You won't like it. And he's right. All the songs we'd always known being sung to a girl, even for a gay person, didn't feel right when they were changed because we got to know them and love them. And it's taken until now to change that. And what really changes it when the singer writes his own songs, so you only ever hear it in the first place sung for a guy, and then it's completely acceptable. It was the changing of the gender in the songs, not the fact that they were singing to their own gender. And so Ahmed, he was usually right. But Nesri still went on arguing about it. He used to argue with me, we should have done that, it would have been huge. I'm not sure if it would.
You wrote that despite all the success you've had, Simon, you often didn't feel part of the music industry. Why not?
Because I'm gay, probably. I mean, you know, whatever you say that does set you apart. Or you, at an early age, you're used to being a part and then enjoy being a part. You know, I enjoyed being an outsider. When I was young, by the time I was 15 or 16, I was always reading above my age. I remember reading Christopher Isherwood, who was a brilliant gay writer. He didn't ever mention the word gay. He hardly ever mentioned anything to do with homosexuality, but you read into his books that he was gay. He had this totally male society and they all had great time and they never bothered with women. And I remember realizing he was gay and worrying when I was 15 or 16, what would happen if I turned out not to be gay? Because I so much wanted to live this sort of life. So by the time I got the music industry, I felt I enjoyed this sort of separateness. But, you know, I suppose you could say it's snobbishness. It could be snobbishness or inferiority. It could be inferiority or superiority. I really don't know. But you'd see a group of people, or you see an industry dinner, and you knew you could go to it, but you were acting the whole evening as being part of this wonderful club. You didn't feel part of that wonderful club. It's not where you went at your own volition. It was because it was an event I had to go to. I never sat at a table and thought, oh, it's wonderful. I'm in this beautiful industry with all these lovely people. I just acted the part of being like that and then went off to live my own life, which is a much more gay life and much more hedonistic, really. Perhaps all those other people did too. I don't know. And you could say that's sort of snobbery. They're below me. Or you could say that I felt inferior to them. I have no idea, but I didn't feel I mixed well. But I don't think anyone thought I didn't mix well. I mean, I played mixing quite well. It's what artists do the whole time. You don't think George Michael sits at a table with 8 people he's never met before, all music company executives. They all say, oh, he's so wonderful, he's so normal, the way he fits in. Of course he isn't. He's just acting the part for the evening. And I suppose I was good at that too.
Well, Simon, I have only one question left for you. If you could go back and talk to that young Simon who was barely 20 years old, selling magazines door to door in Toronto, and then trying to make it as a trumpet player in a jazz band in Montreal, and really having no clue what to do with your life, what would you say to him?
You're doing the right thing. Just explore, find your own life. I was asked recently by a magazine, I can't remember, it's a rather posh American magazine, very glossy, to tell them 5 things I wish I'd been told when I was starting out. And I said, I probably was told them, and I didn't listen and wouldn't have done them, because the whole point is it's an adventure, it's a game. You have to find your way. If you don't find your own way, you're not playing the game. I wouldn't have listened to anybody. I say in my book, always trust instinct, especially above advice. Advice is not really good stuff.
That's a very, very insightful comment. I've always trusted my instinct, and it never led me wrong. I'm so glad you said that. Well, Simon, yeah. I must tell you that I've enjoyed your books and your movies immensely, and your philosophy of life and your zest for living have been very inspiring to me. Thank you so much for your huge contribution to the music industry, and thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Well, it's all a bit overwhelming. I still don't really feel I deserve to have all that said to me. But I know the books I've written are good, but I don't really feel that I've contributed anything to an industry which I haven't felt hugely a part of. Although, in fact, other people would see it differently.
Yes, I beg to differ. And not only were you a huge part of the music industry and now the film industry, you've been a huge part of our show. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to chat with me.
Absolutely lovely. Totally enjoyable. Thank you.
Our guest has been a true legend in the music industry, Simon Napier-Bell. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver, and to my team in LA and the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.